The morning sky was still soft and gray when Ethan slowly opened his eyes. For a few quiet seconds, he forgot what day it was. But then, his eyes moved toward the brand new school uniform hanging beside the window. And suddenly, his stomach felt tight. It was his first day at a completely new school. Ethan slowly sat on the edge of his bed. He looked around his room. Everything looked normal, yet somehow completely different. The sound of birds outside the window, the cold morning air touching his skin, even the ticking clock on the wall felt louder than usual. Today was important. Today could change everything. Ethan stood up quietly and walked toward the mirror. He fixed his messy hair with his fingers. Then he tried to smile at himself. But the smile looked nervous. Very nervous. His mind was full of questions. What if nobody talks to me? What if I sit alone? What if everyone already has friends? Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. He took a deep breath. Then he whispered quietly to himself. It's just one day. You can do this. Downstairs, the smell of toast and coffee filled the kitchen. His mother stood near the stove with a warm smile on her face. Big day today, she said softly.
Ethan nodded, slowly, and sat at the table. Are you nervous? She asked. A little. His mother gave a small, understanding smile. That's normal, she said. Everyone feels nervous on their first day. Ethan looked down at his plate quietly. What if people don't like me? He asked. His mother looked at him gently. You don't need everyone to like you. Just be yourself. Those words stayed in Ethan's mind. Over and over again. Just be yourself. A few minutes later, Ethan grabbed his backpack and stepped outside. The cold morning air touched his face immediately. Cars moved through the busy streets. People walked quickly toward work and school. Everything around him seemed fast, but his thoughts moved even faster. As he continued walking, the school building finally appeared in front of him. And instantly, his heartbeat became louder. The school looked enormous. Huge glass windows, tall walls, crowds of students everywhere. Hundreds of students walked through the front gates while laughing and talking with friends. Some stood together in groups. Others checked their phones. Some carried coffee cups while joking loudly before class. Everyone looked comfortable, like they already belonged there. Ethan stopped walking for a second. His hands tightened around the straps of his backpack. And suddenly, he felt small. Very small. He adjusted his backpack strap slowly and began walking toward the entrance. With every step, his heartbeat felt heavier. Inside the building, the hallways were crowded and noisy. Lockers slammed shut. Shoes tapped loudly across the floor. Teachers carried books through the crowds while students rushed around them without stopping. Everything felt confusing. Too fast. Too loud, too unfamiliar. Ethan pulled out the small paper from his pocket again. His eyes moved across the words carefully. Room 214. Simple, just 3 numbers. But somehow, finding room 214 felt impossible. Slowly, he walked through one hallway, then another. Students brushed past him without even noticing him. Some laughed loudly with friends, some stared at their phones, others moved quickly like they already knew exactly where they belonged. Ethan felt like the only person there who had no idea what he was doing. The more lost he became, the more embarrassed he felt. His hands started sweating slightly. He looked around again. Left hallway, right hallway, stairs, more students, more noise. Then suddenly, crash. His book slipped from his hands and fell straight onto the floor after bumping into someone. Paper scattered everywhere. "Oh no, I'm so sorry," a girl's voice said quickly. Ethan looked up. A girl with curly brown hair immediately kneeled down beside him to help pick up the books. A few students walked around them without caring, but she stayed. Ethan quickly grabbed a notebook from the floor. "No, it was my fault," he replied nervously. The girl looked at him for a second, then smiled warmly. "Well, at least now we both survived our first school accident." Ethan laughed quietly. A real laugh, probably his first one that morning. "I'm Ava," she said. "Ethan." Ava tilted her head slightly. "You look lost." Ethan sighed softly. "I am lost." Ava pointed down the hallway behind her. "What room?" 214. Her eyes widened immediately. "No way! I'm going there too." For the first time that morning, Ethan felt slightly relaxed. Not completely comfortable, not fully confident, but less alone. As they walked together through the hallway, Ava talked comfortably about random things. The cafeteria is huge, but the pizza tastes suspicious. Ethan smiled. "And avoid Mr. Thompson if you forget homework. He stares into your soul." Ethan laughed again, longer this time. Ava kept talking about confusing hallways, strict teachers, and students who acted like celebrities for absolutely no reason. Somehow, the school didn't feel as terrifying anymore. When they finally reached the classroom, Ava opened the door slowly. Inside, students were already sitting down and talking quietly. The teacher stood near the board organizing papers carefully. Without looking up, the teacher spoke. "Good morning, everyone. Find your seats quickly." Slowly, Ethan stepped inside nervously and looked around the classroom. At this point, almost every seat was empty. Then, Ethan noticed something. Only one empty chair remained, right in the front row. Of course. He slowly walked toward the empty chair, trying not to make eye contact with anyone. Every step toward the front row felt painfully long. He could feel people noticing him, or maybe it only felt that way. Ethan quietly pulled out the chair and sat down carefully. A few students nearby whispered softly to each other. He couldn't even hear what they were saying, but instantly his face became warm. The teacher finally walked to the front of the classroom and adjusted her glasses. "All right, everyone," she said calmly. "We'll begin with the class rules." Students opened notebooks, pages turned, pens clicked, but Ethan barely focused on anything the teacher was saying. Instead, his mind noticed every tiny sound around him: the tapping of pencils, the turning of pages, the quiet whispers from nearby desks, someone coughing in the back of the room. Even the ticking clock above the whiteboard sounded loud. Everything still felt unfamiliar, like he didn't fully belong there yet. Then suddenly, the teacher smiled at the class and said, "Let's introduce ourselves." Ethan's heart dropped instantly. One by one, students stood up confidently. Some talked about sports, others talked about hobbies. A few students made jokes that made the classroom laugh. Ethan listened carefully while waiting for his turn. And the closer it came, the more nervous he became. Then finally, the teacher looked toward him. "And you?" Ethan slowly stood up from his chair. Every face in the room turned toward him. For one uncomfortable second, the classroom felt completely silent. "My name is Ethan," he began quietly. "I just moved here recently, and honestly, I'm pretty nervous right now." For a second, nobody said anything. Then a few students smiled. One student near the window laughed kindly and raised his hand slightly. "Same." A few other students laughed softly too, not in a mean way, in a real way. And somehow, the classroom suddenly felt less scary. By lunchtime, Ethan followed Ava through the busy hallways toward the cafeteria. The moment they entered, noise exploded everywhere. Conversations, laughter, chairs scraping across the floor. The smell of pizza, fries, sandwiches, and coffee mixing together in the air. Students crowded around tables while others stood in long lunch lines. Ava looked around dramatically. "This place is chaos." Ethan smiled quietly. For the first time all day, his smile felt natural. They carried their trays and sat together near the middle of the cafeteria. Ethan looked around curiously at all the students. At another table, a group of athletes laughed loudly at something on a phone screen. Nearby, two students argued passionately over homework answers. Then suddenly, someone accidentally dropped an entire lunch tray. Crash! The whole cafeteria turned to stare for one dramatic second. Then immediately, everyone went back to normal like nothing happened. Ethan laughed softly. "This school feels like a movie." Ava laughed too. "Give it 1 week, then it'll just feel normal." After lunch, the day slowly became easier. The hallways didn't seem as confusing anymore. The classrooms felt less intimidating. And little by little, Ethan stopped feeling like a stranger. Maybe this new school wouldn't be so bad after all. In science class, something unexpected happened. The teacher asked a difficult question about the lesson. The classroom became quiet. Nobody answered immediately. Without even thinking too much, Ethan slowly raised his hand. For a second, even he looked surprised at himself. Then he answered the question carefully. And he was right. The teacher smiled proudly. Exactly. A few students turned toward him with impressed expressions. Ethan felt a small spark of confidence appear inside him, a feeling he hadn't felt all day. Later in literature class, students worked quietly on a short writing activity. Ethan focused carefully on every sentence. When the teacher walked past his desk, she stopped for a moment. Then she smiled softly. "This is very well written, Ethan." He looked up quickly. "Really?" "Yes," the teacher replied. "You write with a lot of emotion." Those simple words stayed in his mind for the rest of the class. During art class, things became even easier. Students talked casually while drawing and painting. A few classmates nearby started asking Ethan random questions. "Where did you move from? What music do you listen to?" Are you good at drawing? The conversations were simple, normal, easy. And little by little, the fear inside him slowly began to disappear. But the most important moment of the day happened near the very end. During the final class, the teacher stood at the front of the room and said, "I want everyone to write one sentence about your future dreams." The classroom immediately became quiet. Some students began writing quickly without hesitation. Others stared thoughtfully at their papers. Pens moved slowly across notebooks. Ethan looked down at the blank page in front of him. For a moment, he didn't know what to write. Then, slowly, he picked up his pen. And he wrote, "I want to become someone who is not afraid of new beginnings." Ethan stared at the sentence quietly. Something about those words felt important, very important, like he wasn't only writing about the future. Maybe he was writing about today. Then finally, the last bell of the day rang loudly through the school. Instantly, students packed their bags. Chairs moved, voices filled the room again. Everyone rushed toward the door excitedly. But Ethan moved more slowly this time. The hallways no longer looked terrifying. The building no longer felt unfamiliar. Everything somehow felt softer now, safer, more comfortable. Outside near the school gate, the warm afternoon sunlight painted the streets gold. Students walked home while laughing with friends. Cars passed slowly nearby. A cool breeze moved through the air. Ava turned around before leaving with her friends and waved happily. "See you tomorrow, Ethan." Ethan smiled naturally. "See you tomorrow." As he began walking home, he suddenly realized something. The day he feared so much had actually become one of the most meaningful days of his life. Not because everything went perfectly, not because he suddenly became popular, but because he faced something scary and survived it. That morning, he arrived feeling alone, nervous, afraid. But by the end of the day, he understood something powerful. Every friendship starts with a simple conversation. Every confident person was once nervous. Every new beginning feels uncomfortable at first. And sometimes, the places we fear the most become the places where our lives slowly begin to change. Ethan stopped walking for a moment and looked back at the school building one last time before turning the corner. Tomorrow would still have challenges. There would still be awkward moments, difficult classes, days where things felt hard. But now, he knew he could handle it. Because the hardest step is always the first one. And he had already taken it.